In this last part on our discussion on subsequences, we will characterize uh, the upper limit and lower limit of a sequence, and we will then discuss a few properties of the upper limit and lower limit of bounded sequences. We will also prove the Cauchy's general principle and one important limit. And finally, as I mentioned in the last lecture, we will also talk about unbounded sequences. So what is the characterization of lim sup of a bounded sequence? Suppose you are given a sequence xn which is bounded, and take a number mu, then mu will be lim sup of xn if and only if for any epsilon greater than 0 there is a positive integer n, so that xn is less than or equal to mu plus epsilon after the capital nth term, and there are infinitely many xn greater than mu minus epsilon. So see, there is a subtle difference between being the lim sup and the limit of a sequence. For any given epsilon, you are saying that you will be able to get a positive integer, so that xn will be less than or equal to mu plus epsilon. So first of all, there is we are not talking about strict inequality here, and after the nth capital nth term. And secondly, when we are saying that there will be infinitely many terms of the sequence which will be greater than mu minus epsilon, we are not forcing that it should be after a certain term or something like that, right? So for a sequence to converge to a number, you should be able to get a capital N positive integer, so that xn is less than mu plus epsilon and xn is greater than mu minus epsilon after the capital Nth term, right? But here that much is not required. Only you wish that xn should be less than or equal to mu plus epsilon for every uh, term after the capital Nth term, and your infinitely many terms of the sequence should be greater than mu minus epsilon, not necessarily after a fixed given term. So this is a necessary and sufficient condition for a number mu to be the lim sup of the given bounded sequence. We have seen that if you have a bounded sequence, its lim sup is a real number always. So we are just giving a characterization now. So let us try to prove this one. So suppose mu is the lim sup of xn, and we will prove first the condition 1 and then the condition 2. So suppose condition 1 is not true, then that means what? That suppose there is an epsilon greater than 0, so that whatever little k you take positive integer, you will always be able to find a nkth term of the sequence which will be greater than mu plus epsilon. You will be able to find a term of the sequence which will be greater than mu plus epsilon, and since it will depend on k, so I'm writing it as x and k. Okay, so just see, we are saying that suppose this is false, that is for any epsilon this condition will hold is not true. That means there is at least one epsilon greater than 0 for which this condition fails. And what was the condition? That for every little n, I should be able to get a capital N, so that for every little n greater than equal to capital N, xn is less than or equal to mu plus epsilon. So this fails means that for I will be able to get an epsilon greater than 0, so that whatever capital N I take, this will fail, right? So there should exist an N in, so if that fails means there will not be any capital N, so they're positive integer. So therefore I'm saying that for any positive integer, this condition fails. So this condition fails means that I should have had that after the nth term xn is less than or equal to mu plus epsilon. So instead of that, what will happen is that whatever positive integer I take, there will be at least one term after that kth term of the sequence which will become greater than mu plus epsilon. That is what I'm writing. So notice, if this happens, then what can you say about x and k? X and k is a subsequence of the original sequence, right? And the original sequence was bounded, so x and k is also bounded, correct? So it will have a convergent subsequence x and k. The subsequence x and k will have a convergent subsequence, but all the terms of the subsequence x and k are greater than mu plus epsilon. So therefore, the convergent subsequence of x and k will be converging to a point greater than or equal to mu plus epsilon. But the convergent subsequence of the subsequence x and k is also a convergent subsequence of the original sequence. So therefore, there is a cluster point of the original sequence which will become greater than equal to mu plus epsilon. But that is a contradiction to the fact that mu is the upper bound of all cluster points. So therefore, what we assumed is wrong, that this condition fails. So therefore, condition 1 is true. I hope I have made myself clear. If you assume that the condition 1 fails, then you will be able to get a subsequence x and k of the original sequence, so that every term of the subsequence x and k will be greater than mu plus epsilon. Now x and k is a bounded sequence. I'm just repeating the argument again. So now x and k is a bounded sequence because the original sequence was a bounded sequence. Therefore, x and k has a convergent subsequence. And where will that convergent subsequence converge to? It will converge to a point which is greater than equal to mu plus epsilon, because all the terms of the subsequence are going to be greater than mu plus epsilon. So its limit has to be greater than equal to mu plus epsilon. Now this convergent subsequence of the subsequence x and k is actually also a subsequence of the original sequence. So therefore, what you're saying that is there is a subsequence of the original sequence which converges to a point which is greater than equal to mu plus epsilon. That means there exists a cluster point of xn which is greater than equal to mu plus epsilon, means it is greater than mu. But mu was an upper bound of all cluster points, so that is a contradiction. So this was the first part, and we also have to show that there are infinitely many xn which are greater than mu minus epsilon. So notice that mu is the supremum of all the cluster points. That means what? It is the least upper bound. So if you take any epsilon greater than 0, then mu minus epsilon to mu, this would have, mu is included, notice here, this would have a point, a cluster point of the original sequence, right? So since this will have a cluster point of the original sequence, if you look at the open interval mu minus epsilon to infinity, that is a neighborhood of that cluster point. So therefore, there are infinitely many xn's in that neighborhood, which means xn, there are infinitely many xn which are greater than mu minus epsilon. Actually, I could have spoken of this in a slightly easier fashion if you agreed to the following facts, that we have already seen that the set of all cluster points of xn is closed and bounded, and the lim sup is the supremum of all cluster points. So therefore, lim sup is actually going to be limit of the set of all cluster points, but that means that it is going to belong to the set of all cluster points, because that is a closed set. So if you look at the lim sup, it is actually going to be a cluster point itself. Since mu is a cluster point itself, therefore if you take any epsilon greater than 0 and look at the open interval mu minus epsilon to infinity, that is a open neighborhood of mu, right? So we have seen in the last lecture that every neighborhood of a cluster point contains infinitely many terms of the sequence. So therefore, the condition 2 holds. that is sufficient, right? Whatever we have learned till now tells you this very straightforward way. So if mu is the lim sup of xn, then these two conditions hold. Now we have to show that suppose mu is a number for which these two conditions hold, then it is going to be a cluster point. So suppose 1 and 2 hold for some real number mu, and let us take little x to be a cluster point of the sequence. What do I have to show? I want to show that mu is the lim sup of xn. So every cluster point should be less than or equal to mu, and mu should actually be the least upper bound of all the cluster points of the given sequence. So therefore, first we start with showing that mu is an upper bound. Again, we do it by contradiction. So suppose there is a cluster point which is greater than mu. Then what you do is you take epsilon to be equal to x minus mu by 2. So this number is clearly greater than 0 because x is greater than mu. And what is your condition 1 telling you? That mu satisfies this property, that for every little n, you will be able to get a positive integer capital N, so that for every little n greater than equal to capital N, xn is less than or equal to mu plus epsilon. So just uh, write that down, that for this particular epsilon there is a capital N positive integer, so that for all little n greater than equal to capital N, xn is less than or equal to mu plus epsilon. But what is mu plus epsilon? Just calculate from here. X minus mu is equal to 2 epsilon, right? So mu plus epsilon is equal to x minus epsilon. So what you're getting is that since condition 1 is true for the number mu, so xn is going to be less than or equal to x minus epsilon for all terms after the capital Nth term. But then how are you going to get a subsequence which converges to x? Because in all the terms after a certain finite term of the sequence are less than x minus epsilon, right? Or less than or equal to x minus epsilon. That is sufficient. So whatever you take as your, what do you say, uh, subsequence of the original sequence, that is going that can in no way converge to the point x. X is sitting somewhere at a distance, right? So x was here, x minus epsilon is somewhere here, and all the terms after a finite term of the sequence xn are less than or equal to x minus epsilon. So if something is some subsequence there is converging, it cannot converge to x. And if you want a convergent subsequence of the original sequence, it has to be from there, because after x minus epsilon there are only finitely many terms of the sequence. So therefore this guarantees that there will be no subsequence which will converge to x, but that is a contradiction to the fact that we had chosen that x is a cluster point of the sequence, right? So therefore what you have got is that this possibility that x is greater than mu is false, and hence any cluster point is going to be less than or equal to mu. So mu is going to be an upper bound of all cluster points, first of all. Secondly, if you take any epsilon greater than 0, then there are infinitely many terms of the sequence which are greater than mu minus epsilon, right? So if you look at these infinitely many terms of the sequence which are greater than mu minus epsilon, then among those, by Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, you will be able to get a convergent subsequence, right? So you, because if you just look at these terms, they also form a bounded sequence, right? Your original sequence xn is a bounded sequence. Now look at those terms of xn which are greater than mu minus epsilon. Then they are also a sequence. So by Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, they have a convergent subsequence. But if they have a convergent subsequence, that convergent subsequence is actually a convergent subsequence of the original sequence. So you will be able to get a cluster point of the uh, original sequence in the which is greater than or equal to mu minus epsilon. Am I making myself clear? For any epsilon greater than 0, there are infinitely many xn greater than mu minus epsilon. So let me just tweak this a little bit. Take any epsilon greater than 0. I want to use this fact and show that mu is the least upper bound, right? So take any epsilon greater than 0, and then instead of looking at epsilon greater than 0, look at epsilon by 2. Then there are infinitely many terms of the sequence which are greater than mu minus epsilon by 2, right? So since there are infinitely many terms which are greater than mu minus epsilon by 2, you will be able to get a convergent subsequence of the original sequence, all of whose terms are greater than mu minus epsilon by 2. So the corresponding limit, which is a cluster point of the original sequence, will be greater than equal to mu minus epsilon by 2. So since it is greater than mu minus epsilon by 2, so therefore there will be a cluster point which will be greater than mu minus epsilon, right? Mu minus epsilon is strictly less than mu minus epsilon by 2, and you are going to get a cluster point which is greater than or equal to mu minus epsilon by 2. So therefore there is a cluster point in the semi-open interval mu minus epsilon to mu. So that means when you decrease mu by positive quantity epsilon, then it no longer remains an upper bound. There is a cluster point which is greater than mu minus epsilon, and hence mu is the supremum of all cluster points of Xn. So I hope I have made my arguments clear. The arguments are not convoluted. They are very straightforward, but you have to just be careful and look at your definitions logically. So the best way to learn it is by looking at the characterization of limit inferior and prove it as an assignment. So this is going to be your final assignment for this particular course, that suppose Xn is a bounded sequence of real numbers, then a real number lambda is the lim_inf of Xn if and only if for any epsilon positive you will be able to get a capital N positive integer such that Xn is greater than equal to lambda minus epsilon after the capital Nth term, and there are infinitely many Xn which are less than lambda plus epsilon. So if these two conditions actually characterize your lim_inf of a given bounded sequence of real numbers. So my assignment is that you should try to prove this, and you will be able to prove it using arguments similar to what we discussed just now for lim_sup. Okay, and I have just made a simple remark here that if you have a bounded sequence, then clearly if you look at the set of all cluster points of Xn, then we have seen that it is non-empty. And what was lim_sup of Xn? That was just the least upper bound of the set of all cluster points, and lim_inf was the greatest lower bound of the set of all cluster points. So clearly by your conditions on infimum and supremum, you get that lim_inf Xn is less than or equal to lim_sup Xn. Okay. So next we will see what happens vis-a-vis convergence of a sequence and lim_inf and lim_sup. We did one result in this direction in the previous lecture, or I think previous lecture, that if you have a convergent sequence, then every subsequence of that convergent sequence is also going to converge, and it will converge to the same limit. So if limit n tending to infinity Xn is equal to L, then lim_inf Xn is going to be equal to lim_sup Xn is going to be equal to L, because the set of cluster points of the convergent sequence will consist of only one number L. So the set of cluster points of this convergent sequence Xn is the singleton L. So clearly lim_inf is equal to lim_sup is equal to L. So this way your result is clear. Now what we want to show is that the converse is also true. That suppose you are given a bounded sequence and suppose lim_inf xn is equal to lim_sup xn is equal to L. Then the sequence is going to converge and it converges to L. That is what you want to show. So let us see. Take any epsilon greater than 0. Then we know by the characterization of lim_sup that there exists a positive integer n, so that xn is going to be less than or equal to L plus epsilon by 2 for all little n greater than equal to capital N. Let us go back and see that given any epsilon greater than 0, something is the lim_sup means these two conditions hold. So after a certain term, there will be a term, so that after that term, all the terms of the sequence will be less than or equal to the lim_sup plus epsilon. So instead of epsilon, what we do is we look at epsilon by 2, and in this case we have lim_sup is equal to L. So instead of mu, I'm writing L now. So after a certain term, all the terms of the sequence will be less than or equal to L plus epsilon by 2, because L is the lim_sup. Again, after a certain term, all the terms of the sequence will be greater than equal to L minus epsilon by 2, because lim_inf of xn is equal to L, right? You are using this property. Here, instead of lambda, you're writing L, and instead of epsilon, you're taking epsilon by 2, right? So this much is true, and a priori, what will you get is that after the certain term, that will be capital N1 for lim_sup say, and N2 for lim_inf. But if you take the maximum of N1, N2, then you will get a capital N, and after that maximum of N1, N2, so that after capital N, both these inequalities will hold. Now L plus epsilon by 2 is less than L plus epsilon clearly, and L minus epsilon is less than L minus epsilon by 2. So using the characterization of lim_inf and lim_sup, what do you get? That given any epsilon greater than 0, you are able to get a positive integer n, so that after the nth capital Nth term, all the terms of the sequence lie in the epsilon neighborhood of L. Now epsilon was arbitrary, so this just implies that xn is convergent to L as n tends to infinity. So that is all the result is telling you. So it is straightforward. Okay. So you will say that I'm saying that everything is straightforward, but there are actually so many results. So to get used to these things, you have to keep on doing it on your own. So that is a background assumption that you will be working hard after I finish my lecture. So let us go on using that assumption. Okay. So suppose now xn is a monotonic sequence. This is another result. And this monotonic sequence has a convergent subsequence. Assume that. Then the monotonic sequence also has to converge, and it will converge to the same limit. That is what your result is telling you. If you think about it for a little while, then it should make sense, because if it is monotone increasing, there, for example, and suppose you have a subsequence which is converging. So after a certain term for this subsequence, all the terms of the subsequence are going to lie in any chosen epsilon neighborhood of L, but the other terms of the sequence are related to these terms of the subsequence, because the sequence is monotonic, right? So they are all going to be greater than these subsequence terms, and therefore they will also go and land in that epsilon neighborhood. So let us do it carefully. Okay, so take any epsilon greater than 0, then since you know that there is this convergent subsequence, you have a capital K positive integer, sorry, so that mod xn k minus L is less than epsilon for all little k greater than equal to capital K. This much you have. Now, this is a trick. Okay, take any n which is a positive integer, first of all. Okay, then if you take a n, then look at this n little k's. This n little k's are actually a strictly monotone increasing unbounded above sequence of positive integers, right? That is the way a subsequence is formed. You have xn1, xn2, xn3 and so on, where n1 is less than n2 is less than n3, etc. So it is strictly monotone increasing, and it is clearly unbounded above because you are constructing a infinite subsequence. So if you think of it like that, if you take any positive integer n, you will be able to get a term, an index like this, index of some term of the subsequence, which will be greater than n, right? Just forget about this for the time being. So you will be always able to get some positive integer which is corresponding to one of the nk's, which will be greater than n, because nk is unbounded above. So since it will depend on n, this is it looks horrible, but it makes sense to choose this notation. So this k will be dependent on n, right? So you will be able to get a kn, so that nkn is greater than n. This you can always do for every positive integer. So in particular, if you choose your positive integer to be greater than n capital K, where the capital K is coming from here, then also you will be able to do this. So that is what I have written here. Given any positive integer n, so that n is greater than nk, this is an extra condition you are putting in, you will be able to get a kn, so that nkn will be greater than n. So then automatically nkn is going to be greater than nk, right? Because n is greater than nk. So that means that k has to be less than kn. Correct? Because nk is a monotonically increasing sequence. So if n capital K is less than n kn, then capital K has to be less than kn. So that is what you have written here. This is going to be your crucial observation. Okay, so let us see. First, you assume that xn is monotone increasing. Then, what do you know? You know that mod xnk minus L is less than epsilon for all little k greater than equal to capital K. So, you take your little n greater than n capital K, right? So, if you take your little n greater than n capital K, you have got this kn, so that nkn is greater than n, and nkn is greater than nk, that is kn is greater than k. So what can you say about nkn? X nkn minus L mod of that is going to be less than epsilon. That means that L minus epsilon is less than x nkn is less than L plus epsilon. So at least you are able to say that x nkn is less than L plus epsilon. It is also going to be greater than L minus epsilon, but there are some more terms in between. And xn is clearly less than xnkn, because your n is less than, see, go back again, n is less than xnkn, and xn is monotone increasing. That is what you assumed. So xn is less than xnkn, right? So therefore xn is less than xnkn is less than less than L plus epsilon. Very good. And what can you say about xn? Again, n is greater than nk, and xn is a monotone increasing sequence. So okay, I have you could have written less than or equal to here, because I'm not assuming strictly monotone increasing. So xn capital K is going to be less than or equal to xn, and xn capital K is less than L minus epsilon from here, right? So what are you getting? You're getting that xn is sandwiched between xn capital K and xn kn, because you have got this inequality that n is sandwiched between nk and nkn. So here it is strict inequality, and when you are looking at the term of the sequence, then it will be less than or equal to, because it is a monotone increasing sequence. So whatever, it is sandwiched between these two terms of the sequence, and this term is clearly less than L plus epsilon, the way you have because the subsequence x and k is converging to L. So we had chosen this particular inequality after the, which is true after the capital Kth term. And similarly, xn capital K is going to be greater than L minus epsilon. So finally what you are getting is that if you take little n greater than this positive integer n capital K, then xn is going to lie between L minus epsilon and L plus epsilon. That is, the distance between xn and L will be less than epsilon. Now this was for any arbitrary epsilon. So you have proved that the xn is a convergent sequence converging to L. So if xn is monotone increasing, you have proved. So how will you prove for monotone decreasing? Again, the crucial thing is that for any positive integer n greater than n capital K, the capital K is coming from here, you are able to get a kn positive integer greater than K, so that n is sandwiched between n capital K and nkn. So if you look at the terms of the sequence, if it is monotone decreasing, the inequalities will change, right? So you will get xnkn less than or equal to xn less than or equal to xnk. This is less than or equal to. Okay, so this you will get. Again, by your first expression, what do you get for kn? It is true that xnkn, I'm sorry, so xnkn is greater than L minus epsilon, and xn capital K is less than L plus epsilon. So finally what you get a less than or equal to here, but here there is a strict inequality. So you get that for all little n greater than the positive integer n capital K, xn is an term which lies between L minus epsilon to L plus epsilon. Therefore, since epsilon was arbitrary, you get that the sequence xn is convergent and it converges to L. This proof was clearly not straightforward. You needed some little bit of non-trivial thinking here. So the result is clear that if you have a monotonic sequence and if it has a convergent subsequence, then the monotonic sequence will also be convergent and it will converge to the same limit as the convergent subsequence. So it is not possible to have a monotonic sequence which will have many cluster points. If it has a cluster point, a real number as a cluster point, then that has to be unique. This is one corollary which you can deduce from here. Okay, and there is another theorem which says something far more crucial, but we will not prove it because it is not part of our course. The proof is not part of our course. The theorem is of course needed. It will be needed later on, so therefore we mention it here. What does it say? That if you take any sequence of real numbers, then it will have a monotonic subsequence. So this is extraordinary as on its face, but it is possible, and the proof is possible means it is true actually. And how do you prove it? You actually show a way of choosing such a monotonic subsequence, a constructive proof, and we just leave out the proof from the lecture because it is not necessary to know it right now. Okay. So we have this result that any sequence of real numbers has a monotonic subsequence. This we will remember. Okay. Now another result which I need, and therefore I'm going to prove it, is the following: that if you have suppose two bounded sequences, so that term by term the an is less than or equal to bn, right? So suppose an and bn are two bounded sequences, and for every positive integer n, suppose that an is less than or equal to bn, then you can show that lim sup of an is going to be less than or equal to lim sup of bn, and lim inf of an is going to be less than or equal to lim inf of bn. So to prove this, see, we had seen such a thing for convergent sequences. If an and bn were convergent, then limit n tending to infinity an is less than or equal to limit n tending to infinity bn. This we had seen. So same type of property holds for upper limit and lower limit also, and the proof is by contradiction. So it is convenient to give some names. So that is the first thing which we have done. We have called lim sup an to be equal to mu1, lim sup bn to be mu2, lim inf an to be lambda1, and lim inf bn to be lambda2. Okay, so we will do it step by step. So there are two parts. First we will show this inequality and then this one. Okay, so I want to show that mu1 is less than or equal to mu2. I assume the converse. I assume that that is not true. So if possible, suppose that mu1 is greater than mu2. Then what you do is you take epsilon to be mu1 minus mu2 divided by 2. This 2 is dividing by 2 is helpful in getting neat looking expressions. That is the basic reason actually. And so what do you get? You get epsilon equal to mu1 minus mu2 by 2, and that is positive by our assumption that mu1 is greater than mu2. So, and this implies, as we had seen some time back, that mu2 plus epsilon is equal to mu1 minus epsilon, right? You just look from here. You just look at mu1 minus mu2, that is equal to 2 epsilon, and hence epsilon is mu1 minus mu2 by 2, right? So that is all I'm trying to say here. Okay, so now use the fact that this mu2 is the lim sup of Bn. So since it is the lim sup of Bn, so there is a positive integer capital N such that after the capital Nth term, all the terms of the sequence will be less than or equal to mu2 plus epsilon. Right? This was the characterization, one of the conditions in the characterization. So this is true for Bn. Again, mu1 is the lim sup of the sequence An. So therefore, for this epsilon, with the same epsilon, there are infinitely many an which are greater than mu1 minus epsilon, right? So this is true. We are using the condition 1 of the characterization for Bn and the condition 2 for the characterization for An. And now you see, what does this imply? Mu1 minus epsilon is equal to mu2 plus epsilon. So what do you get? An is greater than Bn, right? For infinitely many n. That is what you're getting, because after a certain finite term, capital Nth term, all the Bn's are less than or equal to mu2 plus epsilon, which is equal to mu1 minus epsilon, and that is going to be less than infinitely many an. So infinitely many an are going to be greater than Bn. But that is a contradiction, because we had assumed that an is less than or equal to Bn for all n. So therefore, our assumption that mu1 greater than mu2 is false, and hence mu1 is less than or equal to mu2. So similar proof is for the second condition also. I want to show that lambda1 is less than or equal to lambda2. Lambda1 was the lim inf of an, and lambda2 was the lim inf of bn. So if lambda1 is greater than lambda2, again what you do is you just assume that epsilon is equal to lambda1 minus lambda2 divided by 2. So that will necessarily imply that lambda1 minus epsilon is equal to lambda2 plus epsilon as before. Now you apply the characterization of lim in first part for an and second part for bn. So since lambda1 is the lim inf of an, there will be a positive integer capital N, so that after the capital Nth term, all the terms of the sequence An will be greater than or equal to lambda1 minus epsilon. Again, lambda2 is the lim inf of Bn, so there are infinitely many Bn's which are less than lambda2 plus epsilon. So again, you are getting the same type of problem. Bn is less than lambda2 plus epsilon, which is equal to lambda1 minus epsilon, and which is less than or equal to an for all terms after the capital Nth term. So there are infinitely many Bn's which will become less than an, which is contrary to our hypothesis that an is less than or equal to Bn for all little n positive integer. Hence, this assumption that lambda1 greater than lambda2 leads to a contradiction, so it is false. Therefore, lambda1 has to be less than or equal to lambda2. So this is our result. You can do several more results of this type, but I'm leaving it out as a tutorial and we will just look at one very important limit now. So we had already proved that limit n tending to infinity 1 plus 1 by 1 factorial plus etc. plus 1 by n factorial is equal to e. What we had done was we had shown that if you look at the sequence whose nth term is 1 plus 1 by 1 factorial plus 1 by 2 factorial plus etc. plus 1 by n factorial, then that is a monotonically increasing bounded above sequence, and hence it is convergent, and we had called the limit of that sequence e. So in the slide you notice that I have taken that sequence. So what we had actually shown was limit n tending to infinity Sn is equal to E, the Euler's number. Now what I want to show is that limit n tending to infinity 1 plus 1 by n to the power n, that is also equal to the same limit E. And we had looked at this sequence earlier also. We had what we had done there was we had shown that here I'm following those terms as Tn. So I have shown that this sequence Tn is monotonically increasing bounded above. So we had decided that we had concluded that your sequence Tn is convergent, but now we are doing something more than that. We are saying that the limit is going to be exactly equal to the Euler's number. So how will you prove this? So let us write down what is Tn. Tn is 1 plus 1 by n to the power n. So it is equal to, by binomial expansion, summation j is equal to 0 to n choose j, 1 by n to the power j. Right? We have seen this type of argument before. So this is going to be equal to what? N factorial divided by j factorial into n minus j factorial. So you cancel out n minus j factorial from n factorial. What is left out is n minus j plus 1 etc. till n minus till n. So I have written it as n minus j plus j for convenience, and that you divide by n to the power j. I hope this is ringing a bell. We had seen this type of argument before also, and we leave out the 1 by j factorial as a separate product term. Okay, and then what we will do is we will divide each of these terms in the product in the numerator by n. There are exactly j terms in the numerator, so that is why I wrote n like this to emphasize that. So what do you get? You get this is equal to summation j is equal to 0 to n 1 by j factorial into 1 minus 1 by n etc. 1 minus j minus 1 by n, right? So each of these is going to be less than or equal to 1. When is it equal to 1? When j is equal to 1, right? Because j 1 minus 1 becomes 0. So these are all less than or equal to 1. So therefore Tn is going to be less than or equal to Sn, right? So since Tn is less than or equal to Sn, by what we proved just now, is that, so I have written hence Tn is a bounded sequence, but we have already seen this, right? So by what we proved just now, lim sup of Tn is going to be less than or equal to lim sup of Sn, but Sn is a convergent sequence, right? So its lim sup is actually equal to its limit. So lim sup Tn is going to be less than or equal to E. At least this much is true. Very good. Now what we do is we use a little bit of a trick. What we do is we fix a positive integer m and then look at summation j is equal to 0 to m 1 by j factorial 1 minus 1 by n etc. till 1 minus j minus 1 by n, where your j is varying from 0 to m. So you're taking it till m, right? So just look at it, it looks familiar, right? This is just like this, but here the sum was till n. So what we are doing is that instead of going till n, we are just looking at the first m uh, terms of this sequence and calling that wn, right? So wn is so I should have maybe mentioned here that this wn will be defined for all n greater than equal to m. So that I've done in the next line, but I should mention here also, because when I'm writing such a thing, j is equal to 0 to m, this m is essentially less than n. That is what I'm trying to imagine. So I want to construct a sequence dependent on this m, right? So the first term is going to be your n plus 1th uh, for m is equal to n plus 1. That is what I'm trying to say. For first, W1 will be for m equal to n plus 1, W2 will be for m is equal to n plus 2, and so on. That is what we are looking at. And what have we done? We had a sum of positive numbers here. We had a sum of positive numbers which was equal to Tn, and from these sum of positive numbers we are looking at the first m plus 1 terms. We are leaving out the rest of them. So naturally the sum is going to become less than or equal to the original one, right? So Wn is going to be less than or equal to Tn for all n greater than equal to m. So for my convenience, what I have done is that instead of writing this as W1 is equal to j is equal to 0 to m plus 1 second, yeah, my m is fixed. So if I take I'm just taking till the mth one. Now if I take n equal to n plus 1, from there I have to start, right? I have to take n equal to m plus 1. So from m plus 1 onwards I have to start. So instead of indexing this by 1, when I take n equal to m plus 1, I index this by m plus 1. There is no problem. If you don't like this, then what you can do is you just suppose that W1, W2, etc. till Wm, they are all 0. Doesn't matter. Okay. And then from Wm plus 1 onwards, you define it like this. Right? For all little n greater than equal to m, you define it like this. And for the first m terms of the sequence Wn, you just let them all be 0, for example. So it is not going to affect your properties of the sequence vis-a-vis its cluster points or anything, because first few terms do not affect the convergence. Therefore, if you look at the sequence Wn, it is going to be less than or equal to Tn for all n greater than equal to m. Why am I specifying this is I just want to keep this indexing the same, right? So if I had not done that, if I had said that if this is m plus 1, then I want to write 1 here, then there would be a problem. I would have to write Wn minus m is equal to this, right? So that would look messy, and we are not bothering about that. What we do is we take the first m terms of the sequence Wn to be 0. Let me make it precise. And from the m plus 1th term onwards, we are just looking at this summation, right? Changing your n. First you take n equal to m plus 1, then you take n equal to m plus 2, and so on, but keep on adding till the mth term, right? You leave out the last one for n equal to m plus 1, leave out the last two for n equal to m plus 2, and so on. So you will get this. I think I have made myself clear. So if this is true, then what does this mean? This means what is Wn? Let us focus on this again. Look at limit n tending to infinity Wn. So this is limit n tending to infinity, this sum. Now this sum is finite. So limit will go inside the sum. We know that limit n tending to infinity an plus bn is equal to limit n tending to infinity an plus limit n tending to infinity bn, right? So if you look at the limit of this sum, that is equal to summation j is equal to 0 to m limit n tending to infinity, this term. And if n tends to infinity, then 1 by n, 2 by n, etc., j minus 1 by n, they will all converge to 0. So 1 minus 1 by n converges to 1, etc. 1 minus j minus 1 by n converges to 1 as n tends to infinity. So this product converges to 1 as n tends to infinity, and j is independent of n. It is not dependent on L at all. It is just a number between 0 and n. So if you take the limit as n tends to infinity, you will only be left out with 1 by j factorial for this particular term. So if you limit n tending to infinity, wn will exist, and that will be equal to precisely summation j is equal to 0 to m 1 by j factorial. So that is Sm. So therefore you get that limit n tending to infinity, wn is equal to Sm. But now you have got that wn is a convergent subsequence. So its limit is the same as its liminf, the lower limit, and since wn is less than or equal to tn after a certain term, so therefore the lower limit of wn is going to be less than or equal to lower limit of tn. When you did the proof, there you did the proof for uh, sequences which had the property that this less than or equal to condition was for all terms, but it is not necessary, right? All you need is that after a certain term, if this happens, then this is bound to happen, because after you are looking at uh, limits of some subsequences, that is limits of sequences, so they are independent of what is happening at the to the first finitely many terms of the sequence. So even if these two sequences did not satisfy this criterion for the first few terms, it would not affect the result. If after a certain term an becomes less than or equal to bn, that is sufficient to say that liminf an is less than or equal to liminf bn. If you look at the proof, you see that you are asking about terms after a certain term, so that is not a big deal at all. I hope I have made myself clear. So therefore, since wn is less than or equal to tn for all n greater than equal to m, therefore you get that the lim inf of wn is less than or equal to lim inf of tn. But wn is a convergent sequence, so it is actually limit n tending to infinity wn, which is less than or equal to lim inf of tn. So you get what? You get that Sm is less than or equal to lim inf of tn. Now lim inf of tn is a fixed number, right? Real number. And Sm is a sequence which is indexed by m. So if you take limit m tending to infinity Sm, that will also be less than or equal to lim inf tn. This is just a real number. So you get limit m tending to infinity Sm less than or equal to lim inf tn. And what is limit m tending to infinity Sm? That is the Euler's number E. So you have got that E is less than or equal to lim inf Tn. Why did I write lim inf and lim sup here for Tn, even though I knew that Tn was a convergent sequence, was just to make my arguments clearer. Then I did not want to fudge it even more than what it would have looked like. It is looking like right now. So instead of writing limit tn, I'm just writing lim sup here, and similarly I'm using, because that is the property which I'm using. So therefore I'm writing it like that. And so I have got what? That lim inf tn is greater than equal to E, and lim sup tn is less than or equal to E. But what do I know? I know that lim inf tn is less than or equal to lim sup tn. So you have this I'm sorry. Yeah, that's all. I don't need all those things. I know that Tn is a convergent sequence. So therefore, lim inf Tn is just the limit of Tn as n tends to infinity. So that is greater than equal to E. And similarly, limit of n tending to infinity Tn, which is equal to the upper limit because Tn is a convergent sequence. So that is less than or equal to E. So what have you got? That Tn also converges to E. Therefore, you have shown that limit n tending to infinity 1 plus 1 by n to the power n is also equal to E. This is a very, very important result. Okay, almost finally, the thing which I want to talk about is Cauchy's general principle, which says that any sequence in R is convergent if and only if it is a Cauchy sequence. So this one part of it we have already seen. We saw that if I take a convergent sequence, then it will automatically be a Cauchy sequence. All right. So this was done at the end of the lectures of on sequences. Now what we want to show that if I start with a Cauchy sequence, then it is going to be a convergent sequence, provided it is in R. So everything is in R for us. So suppose I take a Cauchy sequence in R, Xn. I want to show that it is a convergent sequence. So since it is a Cauchy sequence, it is automatically a bounded sequence. We have seen this. Therefore, by Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, it has a convergent subsequence. So suppose Xnk is a convergent subsequence of this given Cauchy sequence Xn, and suppose limit k tending to infinity, Xnk is equal to L. So let us now write down what is the meaning of this. First of all, Xn is a Cauchy sequence. So if you take epsilon greater than 0, you will be able to get a positive integer capital N1, so that whenever m and n are greater than equal to capital N1, mod of xm minus xn will be less than epsilon by 2, right? Because xn is Cauchy. Secondly, this subsequence is converging to L means that there is a capital K positive integer, so that for all little k greater than equal to capital K, mod of xnk minus L is less than epsilon by 2. So now what you do is you just take capital N to be the maximum of this N1 which you got from here, and n little k, where n little k is determined by this capital K. Okay, so corresponding this to this capital K, you have n little kth term of the sequence. So that n index nk is a positive integer. So you look at the maximum of the positive integers n1 and nk, and let it be capital N. So what is the now happening is that for all mn greater than equal to capital N, mod of xm minus xn is less than epsilon by 2. And if you take your nk to be greater than equal to capital N, then that is automatically greater than equal to n capital K, right? So that means that little k is greater than equal to capital K, because n little k forms a strictly monotone increasing sequence. Let me repeat this, that if I take n little k to be greater than equal to capital N, then since capital N is the maximum of these two, n little k is going to be greater than equal to n capital K. But that means that little k is greater than equal to capital K, because this sequence n little k is a strictly monotone increasing sequence, right? So since this will taking n little k greater than equal to capital N will imply that little k is greater than equal to capital K. So you will also have mod xnk minus L is less than epsilon by 2 for any n little k greater than equal to capital N. So you choose one such n little k, fix it, that fix a n little k which is greater than capital N. And now look at any little n greater than equal to capital N. Then what happens? Look at modulus of xn minus L. Then you can introduce, you can add and subtract xn little k from this. So you get mod xn minus xn little k plus xn little k minus L, right? Use triangle inequality. This becomes less than or equal to mod of xn minus xnk plus mod of xnk minus L. Now what is n? N is greater than equal to capital N. And what is nk? Nk is also greater than capital N. So therefore by this first inequality, mod of xn minus xnk is less than epsilon by 2, and by the second inequality, mod xnk minus L is again less than epsilon by 2. So this sum is going to be less than epsilon by 2 plus epsilon by 2, so it is going to be less than epsilon. So therefore, after doing all this hard work, what you have shown is that given any positive number epsilon, you are able to get a positive integer capital N, so that for all terms of the given sequence after the capital nth term, mod of xn minus L is less than epsilon. Hence, what you have got is that Xn is a convergent sequence. Therefore, you have shown that any Cauchy sequence of real numbers is a convergent sequence. I cannot uh, emphasize the importance of this result. This is extraordinarily important, and this had two parts. So the general principle is that a sequence of real numbers is convergent if and only if it is Cauchy sequence. One part we had shown earlier, the other part we showed in this lecture. Okay, so that this is called the Cauchy's general principle. Next, as I promised, let us look at unbounded sequences for a little bit. Suppose I have an unbounded above sequence. Then what does this mean? That I have given it some name, so some Xn. Okay, so that means that if you take any capital K, uh, capital M, whichever you like, capital M positive, you will be able to get a term of the sequence which will be greater than uh, capital M. So suppose that term is the nmth term. So you will get some xnm which will be greater than m, and in fact there will be infinitely many terms which will be greater than capital M, right? Because if there were only finitely many terms which were greater than capital M, then those finitely many terms you could have just bounded by some number, so that you would get a bounded above sequence. So if you have an unbounded above sequence, what is happening is that for any positive integer uh, integer, real number, whatever, for any positive integer capital M, you will get infinitely many terms of the sequence which are greater than capital M, right? So therefore you will be able to choose a subsequence out of this original sequence which will diverge to infinity, right? So if you have an unbounded above sequence, there is a subsequence of Xn which diverges to infinity, and we will write lim sup Xn equal to infinity to mean that Xn is a unbounded above sequence. Okay, there is no problem with that, because now let me just stress it. We'll look at some examples. Okay, unbounded above sequence doesn't necessarily mean that it is properly divergent to infinity. Some other things can also happen. I have just written down some examples, so we will go through them. Similarly, if you have an unbounded below sequence, then you will be able to get a subsequence of Xn which will diverge to minus infinity, because whatever small number uh, minus m you take, where m is a positive number, there will be infinitely many terms of the sequence which will be less than minus m. Otherwise, how will it be unbounded below, right? So since there will be infinitely many terms of the sequence which will be less than minus m, where m is positive, for every positive m, you will be able to extract a subsequence of Xn which is actually properly divergent to minus infinity. So there, in that case, we will write lim inf of Xn equal to infinity. So we are just extending our notations for unbounded sequences also. And please keep in mind that even here, I am not treating infinity. Oh, again, there is a typo. This is minus infinity. Okay. And uh, we are not treating infinity and minus infinity as numbers. Okay. So now these things are, let me just explain this one to you. Suppose a sequence is diverging to infinity. Then what I'm trying to say is that it will diverge to infinity if and only if every subsequence of it diverges to infinity. First of all, if every subsequence of the sequence diverges to infinity, then it is clear original sequence is also a subsequence of itself. Therefore, it will diverge to infinity. And suppose the sequence diverges to infinity, and if you look at any subsequence of Xn, then what is happening is, just try to imagine, suppose you take a subsequence Xnk, all right, and take any positive number capital M, then you will get a certain term after which all the terms of the original sequence itself are greater than capital M. So in particular, all the terms of the subsequence after that after that given fixed term will be greater than capital M. So that subsequence will also diverge to infinity. I hope I have made myself clear. Suppose that your sequence is diverging to infinity and you are looking at a subsequence x and k, and take any capital M positive, then there is a capital N, so that all terms of the sequence after the capital Nth term will be greater than M. So in particular, there now, if you look at capital N, then one of the nk, you have the subsequence x and k, so one of the nk will be greater than capital N, because nk is a strictly monotone increasing sequence unbounded above, so it will become greater than N. So as soon as nk becomes greater than N, xnk becomes greater than M. And therefore, in fact, for any nj where j is greater than k, you will get that xnj is greater than M. Because if nj is greater than nk, then it is automatically greater than capital N, etc. I hope I have made myself clear. I'm just repeating it. So if you take any sequence which is properly divergent to infinity, every subsequence of it will diverge to infinity. And conversely, if you have a sequence every subsequence of which diverges to infinity, then the original sequence also has to diverge to infinity. So a sequence xn diverges to infinity if and only if its lim_inf and lim_sup are both infinity, where um, I have written a hence. Actually, I want to say that this statement, I want to write it like this. Okay, that is what I want to mean. Similarly, you can show that a sequence diverges to minus infinity if and only if every subsequence of xn diverges to minus infinity. So see, I'm being slightly sloppy here. What I'm doing is that when I said that a sequence diverges to infinity if and only if every subsequence of xn diverges to infinity, I want to extend my, even though I said I will not treat infinity and minus infinity as numbers, but when I'm arguing things like this, what I'm doing is that in my mind I'm imagining as if infinity and minus infinity are also numbers. So if I have a properly divergent sequence diverging to infinity, I'm extending my idea of cluster points, and I'm saying that the only cluster point which xn will have is infinity, so to say. So therefore, its lim_inf as well as lim_sup would be infinity. So I did not wish to write hence a sequence, etc. What I wanted to say was that this first statement, that a sequence diverges properly to infinity, is written as lim_inf xn equal to lim_sup xn equal to infinity, and it means the logic is clear here, because we had decided to write that if a sequence is properly divergent to infinity, then limit n tending to infinity xn is equal to infinity. That particular mathematical expression means that the sequence is properly divergent to infinity. And we have been discussing for bounded sequences that lim_inf equal to lim_sup means that the sequence is convergent and so on. So all those things are playing in our mind when we try to make such a statement. Forget about this hence. All right. And similarly for a sequence which is properly divergent to minus infinity. Okay, so let us look at some examples, which is the best way to look at unbounded sequences actually. If you look at a sequence whose nth term is n, say, so then what is happening? It is just 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So it is a properly divergent sequence diverging to infinity, and therefore its lim_sup and lim_inf both are infinity. That is what we write. Okay, lim_inf n equal to lim_sup n is equal to infinity. In fact, we write lim n tending to infinity, n is equal to infinity. If you want a bounded, sorry, if you want a sequence which is properly diverging to minus infinity, once you have an example of a sequence which is properly diverging to infinity, just multiply it with -1, you will get the example. So that is what I have done here. Now I want to stress that if you have a unbounded sequence, then it is not necessary that you will get some very neat things. So for example, if you look at the sequence whose nth term is -1 to the power n times n, then what is it looking like? We have discussed this before also. It is starting with -1, right? And then it goes to 2, then -3, then 4, then -5, then 6, then -7, then 8, then -9, and so on. So all odd terms are getting a negative sign in front of them, and the even terms are going to be positive. So in this case, what is happening is that if you look at the even term subsequence, that is properly divergent to infinity, and if you look at the odd term subsequence, that is properly divergent to -infinity. Therefore, what I said here, that if you have an unbounded, so it is both unbounded above and unbounded below, -1 to the power n into n. And for this sequence, that particular example, lim sup is going to be infinity and lim inf is going to be -infinity. See, we are not going to use this extra extension of our ideas, but we should know that it is possible to extend the ideas in this direction. Okay, that is why I'm just mentioning these things. And again, you can have a sequence which is unbounded above, but which is bounded below. So for example, I have written x2n minus 1 is equal to n, and x2n is equal to 1 by n. So what is happening here is that your odd terms are diverging properly to infinity, and the even terms are converging to 0. So what are you getting? You're getting that its lim sup is going to be infinity and its lim inf is going to be 0. And as I said before, if you just multiply by -n, I did not bother to multiply by -1 here, but that is okay. So here I'm multiplying by -1, here I'm not. Even if I had it, it would not have affected the lim inf and lim sup. Why? Because if I look at a sequence whose odd terms are -n, and look like -n, so odd 2n minus 1h term is equal to -n, and the even terms look like 1 by n. So what can you say about this sequence? This sequence is going to be unbounded below, right? So because you are getting all those numbers, -1, -2, and so on, whereas it is bounded above by 1, correct? And what is happening here, that for if you look at the cluster points, then you do get a cluster point which is 0, because 1 by n converges to 0. And since it is unbounded below, its lim inf is -infinity. You are getting a subsequence which this particular statement, lim inf xn is equal to -infinity, means precisely that there is a subsequence of the original sequence which is properly divergent to -infinity. That is all you want to say, right? This statement, that if you have an unbounded above sequence, then there is a subsequence of xn which diverges to infinity. This whole uh, statement is written in a short form like this, that lim sup xn is equal to infinity. That is all. And if you want to say that if you an unbounded below sequence will always have a subsequence which diverges to -infinity, that particular mathematical statement is expressed in a short form like this, that lim inf xn is equal to -infinity. This is a typo. Okay, so I hope I have made myself clear. What is expected is that you will be doing several problems, and we are not doing any tutorials for this particular course because we are trying to catch up with what we were already supposed to learn in the second semester. And but I would expect you, since I have given you all the problems in these particular chapters, it is expected that you will be solving those problems. And if you have any problem, you should with the theory or the problem solving, then you should always contact. And we stop here. In the next lecture we will talk about series of real numbers.